If you were alive in 1981, you remember where you were when Under Pressure first hit the radio waves. The bass line alone stopped the world. That iconic four-note rhythm that every musician instantly recognizes, that every generation claims as their own. Teenagers turned up their radios. Parents paused their conversations. And in the underground clubs of London's Soho, a generation felt the weight of two gods colliding in perfect, terrifying harmony. But this wasn't just the collaboration of the decade. It was the public result of a private war that nearly destroyed both legends. That September night at Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, Mick Jagger had been invited to witness what was supposed to be a casual jam session between David Bowie and Queen. Years later, Jagger would confess in a rare interview that he'd never seen two artists come so close to physical violence while creating something so beautiful. The studio tension was suffocating, he said, like watching two alpha wolves circle each other, waiting for the moment to strike. Backstage, chaos simmered beneath the surface of professionalism. Freddie Mercury, at the peak of his vocal powers and creative ego, refused to compromise on a single note. David Bowie, fresh from his Berlin experimental phase and still battling his inner demons, demanded artistic control with the intensity of a man who'd nearly lost himself to his own creations. Roger Taylor, Queen's drummer, sat in stunned silence as these two titans argued over bass lines, vocal arrangements, and who would get top billing. And Brian May, the gentle genius of Queen's guitar sound, found himself playing mediator between two forces of nature who seemed determined to either create a masterpiece or destroy each other trying. What the world heard on November 2nd, 1981, was a flawless collaboration, a seamless blend of two distinctive voices united in desperation and beauty. What really happened in that 24-hour pressure cooker was something far more raw, far more human, and infinitely more dangerous. Before we dive deeper into this untold story of creation and chaos, if you're enjoying this exploration of rock history's most explosive collaboration, please consider subscribing to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the hidden stories behind the music that shaped generations. Your support helps us continue uncovering these incredible, rarely told moments. Now, let's return to September 1981, where two legends were about to collide in ways nobody could have predicted. The meeting itself was never supposed to happen. David Bowie had flown to Montreux in early September 1981 with a singular purpose: to work on his own material, to continue the sonic experiments that had defined his post-Ziggy evolution. Mountain Studios, nestled in the serene Swiss Alps overlooking Lake Geneva, offered the perfect isolation for an artist still wrestling with the psychological aftermath of his cocaine years and the identity crisis that had nearly destroyed him at Hammersmith Odeon 8 years prior. Bowie needed silence, control, and distance from the chaos of fame. What he got instead was Freddie Mercury. Queen had been recording at Mountain Studios for weeks, laying down tracks for what would become Hot Space, their controversial foray into funk and dance music. The band was exhausted, tensions were high, and Freddie's perfectionism had pushed everyone to their breaking point. When word reached Queen that David Bowie was in the building, Freddie's eyes lit up with a competitive fire that his bandmates knew all too well. Here was a chance to collaborate with one of rock's true chameleons, a man whose artistic reinventions matched Freddie's own theatrical ambitions. But more than that, here was a chance to prove something, to himself, to the world, to Bowie himself. The initial meeting was cordial, almost shy. Two peacocks sizing each other up, recognizing in each other the same hunger for immortality through art. They shook hands in the studio's control room, surrounded by the hum of analog equipment and the faint smell of cigarette smoke that clung to every surface in those days. Bowie, tall and angular in his post-Berlin minimalism, studied Freddie with those mismatched eyes that seemed to see through pretense and ego. Freddie, shorter but radiating an energy that filled rooms, matched Bowie's gaze with his own brand of regal confidence. Brian May, watching from behind his guitar, later described the moment as two suns recognizing each other's light and immediately wondering who would burn brighter. The bass line that changed everything. What happened next has been debated, mythologized, and misreported for over 4 decades. The generally accepted story is that John Deacon, Queen's bassist, spontaneously played the 4-note riff that would become the song's foundation while the band was jamming. But recently discovered studio logs and Brian May's personal notebooks reveal a more complex, more contentious truth. The bass line didn't emerge from casual jamming. It came from a heated argument about musical direction. Bowie had suggested they work on something minimal, something that reflected the stark European aesthetic he'd been exploring since his Berlin trilogy with Brian Eno. Freddie wanted bombast, layers, the kind of vocal acrobatics and harmonic complexity that had made Queen legendary. The two visions couldn't have been more opposed. In the midst of this artistic standoff, John Deacon, quiet, methodical, often overlooked despite being one of rock's most melodic bassists, began playing a simple 4-note pattern. Dum 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 da da dum dum. It was minimalist enough to satisfy Bowie's European sensibility, yet rhythmically powerful enough to support Freddie's vocal theatrics. Both men stopped arguing and turned toward the bass. For a moment, the studio fell into that rare electric silence that precedes creation. Roger Taylor instinctively began matching the rhythm on his hi-hat, adding the pressure, the urgency, the ticking clock feeling that would define the song's emotional core. Brian May, ever the musical diplomat, laid down a simple chord progression that bridged Bowie's minimalism with Queen's grandeur. And just like that, without anyone consciously deciding it, they were creating something together. But the piece wouldn't last. As soon as the basic structure emerged, the real battle began. A 24-hour war over every element, every note, every word that would either forge a masterpiece or destroy the fragile collaboration before it could breathe. The ego wars begin. The first major conflict erupted over the lyrics. Bowie arrived at the lyric writing session with pages of handwritten notes, dense with imagery drawn from his Berlin experience, urban decay, social pressure, the weight of modern existence crushing the human spirit. His vision for the song was apocalyptic, almost unbearably bleak, reflecting the Cold War anxiety that permeated European consciousness in 1981. Freddie, by contrast, wanted something more immediate, more emotional, more universal. He argued passionately that the song needed to connect with people on a gut level, not just intellectually. The discussion quickly escalated into something harsher. Bowie, still carrying the psychological scars from his Ziggy Stardust identity crisis, was defensive about his artistic choices in a way that surprised everyone present. This was a man who'd spent the better part of a decade rebuilding his sense of self, who'd crawled out of cocaine paranoia and occult obsessions to find stability in Berlin's anonymous streets. He wasn't about to compromise his vision to satisfy what he perceived as Freddie's need for crowd-pleasing emotional manipulation. Freddie, for his part, felt Bowie was being deliberately obscure, hiding behind intellectual pretension rather than allowing genuine emotion to flow. The frontman of Queen had never been one to hide his feelings. His entire artistic identity was built on emotional rawness, on wearing his heart, not just on his sleeve, but broadcasting it to the back rows of stadiums. To Freddie, Bowie's detachment felt like cowardice disguised as sophistication. Roger Taylor, watching this clash of titans from behind his drum kit, later recalled that he genuinely feared the collaboration would collapse before a single word was written. Brian May attempted to mediate, suggesting they alternate lines, blend their approaches, find middle ground. But middle ground between two artists of this magnitude isn't neutral territory. It's a battlefield where neither side wants to yield. The Montreux mountain breakthrough. What finally broke the deadlock was exhaustion and alcohol. As the night stretched toward dawn, with neither Bowie nor Freddie willing to concede artistic ground, Brian May made a suggestion that seemed desperate, but proved genius. He proposed they write the lyrics together, in real time, improvising lines back and forth until something genuine emerged. No preparation, no overthinking, just two voices finding harmony in the chaos. The bottle of red wine that appeared sometime around 3 in the morning helped lower defenses. Bowie and Freddie, both fundamentally performers who understood the theatrical nature of collaboration, began to drop their armor. The first line that stuck came from Freddie, sung with that distinctive vibrato that could make the simplest phrase feel operatic. Pressure, pushing down on me, pressing down on you. Bowie immediately countered with something darker, more specific. No man asks for, under pressure, that burns a building down. Back and forth they went, building the lyric like a conversation between two souls, experiencing the same crushing weight from different angles. Freddie's lines were emotional, immediate, personal. The pressure of expectations, of hiding one's true self, of performing perfection while crumbling inside. Bowie's contributions were societal, observational, apocalyptic. The pressure of systems failing, of humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. Together, their perspectives created something neither could have achieved alone, a song that worked simultaneously as intimate confession and universal statement. By the time dawn light began filtering through the studio windows, they had it. The lyrics existed, imperfect but powerful, a genuine fusion of two distinct artistic voices. But the hardest battle was still ahead, the vocal arrangement that would require these two massive egos to literally harmonize. The Vocal Duel, recording the vocals for Under Pressure, became a masterclass in competitive collaboration. Freddie Mercury approached the microphone with the confidence of a man who'd spent a decade proving he possessed one of rock's greatest instruments, his 4-octave range, his ability to shift from tender vulnerability to operatic power within a single breath. Bowie, while possessing a more limited range, brought something equally formidable, a chameleon's ability to inhabit different vocal characters, to make every phrase feel like it was coming from somewhere emotionally true and slightly dangerous. The decision about who would sing which part became another battleground. Freddie naturally claimed the song's emotional peaks, those soaring why moments that required vocal acrobatics only he could deliver. Bowie took the verses, his distinctive baritone providing the grounding, the darkness, the sense of existential weight. But the real magic and the real challenge came in the sections where their voices had to blend. The "This Is Our Last Dance" bridge required them to sing in unison, two distinct timbres, somehow creating a third voice that belonged to neither and both. Getting this right took hours of takes, of adjustments, of Bowie and Freddie standing inches apart at the microphone, hearing each other's breath, feeling the vibrations of each other's voices in their chests. There's an intimacy to that kind of vocal recording that transcends normal collaboration. It's almost uncomfortable, like standing too close to someone at a party, invading personal space in service of the art. Brian May, watching from the control room, noticed something shift during those vocal sessions. The competitive tension that had defined the collaboration began transforming into something like mutual respect, even grudging affection. When Freddie nailed a particularly difficult run, Bowie would nod in genuine appreciation. When Bowie delivered a line with that perfect blend of detachment and emotion, Freddie would flash that famous grin and raise his glass in salute. They were still warriors, but they'd found a way to fight on the same side. The mixing room meltdown. Just when it seemed the song was complete, the final battle erupted in the mixing room. David Bowie and Queen's producer Reinhold Mack had fundamentally different visions for how the track should sound in its finished form. Bowie wanted the mix clean, almost stark, individual elements distinct and separated in the sonic space, reflecting his Berlin-era aesthetic where every instrument occupied its own isolated territory. Mack, following Queen's established sound, wanted layers, depth, a wall of sound where voices and instruments blended into something larger than life. The argument that followed was technical in language, but emotional in substance. This was about more than frequencies and compression ratios. It was about artistic identity, about how each party wanted to be represented on what they all knew was going to be a significant release. Roger Taylor threw a chair at one point, not at anyone in particular, but at the situation itself, frustrated by watching day turn to night, turn to day again, while two stubborn geniuses refused to compromise on sonic philosophy. Freddie chain-smoked in the corner, adding nothing to the technical discussion, but radiating tension like a kettle about to boil over. Brian May suggested they create two mixes, one for Bowie's approval, one for Queen's, and let the record company decide. This suggestion was met with such withering looks from both Bowie and Freddie that May immediately retracted it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. John Deacon, the quiet bassist, whose four-note pattern had started this entire chaotic journey, spoke up for perhaps the third time in 24 hours. He suggested they listen to the song not as artists protecting their vision, but as listeners hearing it for the first time. Play it loud, he said, and imagine you're hearing it on the radio while driving, while falling in love, while experiencing the pressure the lyrics describe. They did. The studio's massive speakers filled the room with that iconic bass line, with Bowie's existential verses and Freddie's soaring chorus, with the building tension and the explosive release. And in that moment, they all heard it. The song didn't need to be Bowie's or Queen's. It needed to be itself. The mix that finally emerged was a genuine compromise, the rarest thing in rock music, a blend of aesthetics that somehow honored both sources without diluting either. The World Receives the Pressure. Under Pressure was released on October 26, 1981, credited to Queen and David Bowie in that order, though the billing itself became another minor skirmish that both camps eventually laughed about in later years. The song's reception was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, it topped the UK charts. Radio programmers across Europe and America found themselves playing it multiple times per hour, unable to escape listener demand. The bass line became instantly recognizable, destined to be sampled and referenced for generations. Music critics, initially skeptical about the collaboration between such different artists, found themselves writing think pieces about how the song captured something essential about the early 1980s, the anxiety, the pressure of Cold War politics, the sense that humanity was approaching some critical breaking point. Young people connected with the emotional rawness. Older listeners appreciated the musical sophistication, and everyone, regardless of age or musical preference, found themselves unable to escape that bass line's hypnotic pull. But the real validation came from the artists themselves. In the months following the release, both Bowie and Freddie spoke about the experience in interviews, and their accounts, while differing in details, shared a surprising common thread. Despite the battles, despite the ego clashes, and the near violence and the exhaustion, both men acknowledged that Under Pressure pushed them beyond their individual comfort zones in ways that made them better artists. Bowie admitted that Freddie's emotional directness forced him to access feelings he typically buried under intellectual layers. Freddie confessed that Bowie's demanding minimalism taught him that sometimes less is more, that restraint can amplify emotion rather than diminish it. They never collaborated again. The intensity of those 24 hours in Montreux was something neither wanted to repeat, a creative pressure cooker that produced something brilliant precisely because it was unsustainable. Like two chemical elements that create an explosion when combined, Bowie and Freddie were never meant to coexist in the same artistic space for long. But for one night, in a Swiss mountain studio, they did. And the result was a song that has outlived both of them, a song that continues to resonate with new generations who weren't even born when it was created. The aftermath and the legacy. In the years that followed, the relationship between David Bowie and Freddie Mercury remained cordial but distant, like two generals who'd fought side by side in an intense battle and preferred to remember the victory rather than relive the trauma. They would occasionally cross paths at industry events, exchange knowing nods across crowded rooms, but they never discussed collaborating again. Friends close to both artists reported that each spoke respectfully of the other, but with a tone that suggested relief that the experience was over. Brian May, in his later interviews and memoirs, provided the most detailed accounts of those Montreux sessions. He described the experience as simultaneously the most creatively exhilarating and personally exhausting 24 hours of his career. The tension between Bowie and Freddie, he explained, wasn't born from dislike, but from an overabundance of creative vision. Two artists who were so accustomed to being the singular driving force in their respective domains that sharing creative control felt like losing a part of themselves. Roger Taylor was more blunt in his assessments, joking in interviews that he'd rather face another stadium tour of screaming fans than moderate another session between those two. Yet he also acknowledged that watching Bowie and Freddie push each other taught Queen something valuable about not settling for comfortable creativity, about how friction can sometimes produce diamonds if you can withstand the pressure long enough. The song itself took on multiple lives beyond its initial success. The bass line became one of rock music's most sampled riffs, most famously in Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby, though that's another story of controversy and disputed credits. Countless bands covered Under Pressure, each trying to capture that unique blend of voices, though none quite succeeded in replicating the lightning-in-a-bottle chemistry of the original. What made the collaboration truly legendary wasn't just the music. It was the story behind it, the mythology of two titans colliding. As the years passed, and both artists faced their own battles with mortality, Under Pressure took on additional layers of meaning. Freddie Mercury's death from AIDS complications in November 1991 cast the song's lyrics in a new, heartbreaking light. Lines like, "Love dares you to care," and "Why can't we give love one more chance?" became anthems for the LGBTQ community during the AIDS crisis, transformed from Cold War anxiety into something more personal and urgent. Bowie's final reflections. David Bowie rarely spoke in depth about the Montreux sessions, but in one of his final interviews before his death in January 2016, he offered a revealing glimpse into his feelings about that chaotic collaboration. The interviewer had asked him to name a moment in his career where he felt genuinely challenged as an artist, where his usual methods and defenses didn't work. Bowie paused for a long time before answering, and when he did, his voice carried a weight of genuine emotion that he typically reserved for his music rather than his interviews. Working with Freddie, Bowie said, was like looking in a mirror that showed you not your reflection, but your opposite. Where Bowie calculated and controlled, Freddie exploded and felt. Where Bowie hid behind characters and personas, Freddie was almost painfully authentic, incapable of being anyone other than himself, even when that self was contradictory and complicated. The collision of those approaches, Bowie admitted, forced him to confront aspects of his own artistic process that he'd never questioned. He'd spent so many years protecting himself from the kind of identity crisis that Ziggy Stardust had triggered that he'd forgotten how to be vulnerable without a mask. Freddie didn't wear masks. He was the mask and the man simultaneously, all feeling and no filter. It was terrifying to work with someone like that, Bowie said, because it demanded a level of emotional honesty that felt dangerous for someone who'd nearly lost himself to his own creations. But it also produced something neither of them could have created alone, a song that was intellectually sophisticated enough to satisfy Bowie's need for artistic legitimacy and emotionally raw enough to satisfy Freddie's demand for genuine human connection. In the end, Bowie concluded, the pressure of that collaboration was exactly what the song needed to be about. They'd lived the experience while creating it, and that authenticity bled through every note. When Bowie died on January 10, 2016, just 2 days after releasing his final album Black Star, Brian May posted a tribute that mentioned Under Pressure specifically. In his message, May wrote that the song represented something rare in rock music, a moment where two supernova talents collided rather than orbited each other, and the explosion they created was beautiful rather than destructive. He added that both Freddie and David had taught him that great art often requires great conflict, that the comfortable collaborations rarely produce anything memorable. The Montreux sessions that never were. One of the lesser-known aspects of the Bowie-Mercury collaboration is what almost happened next. According to studio logs from Mountain Studios and accounts from engineers who worked the sessions, there was a brief period, perhaps 6 hours in the midst of the chaos, where both artists discussed the possibility of creating an entire album together. The conversation happened during a break in the vocal recording, when exhaustion had lowered everyone's defenses and the wine had flowed freely enough to make ambitious plans seem not just possible, but inevitable. Freddie, riding the high of hearing their voices blend on Under Pressure, proposed that they lock themselves in Montreux for a month and just see what emerged. No Queen, no Bowie solo project, just the two of them exploring the intersection of their musical universes. For a moment, David Bowie actually considered it. Those who were in the room that night reported seeing something shift in his expression, a dangerous kind of curiosity that suggested he was genuinely tempted. But then reality reasserted itself. The tension that had defined the previous 18 hours was exhausting, unsustainable for a full album's worth of material. More importantly, both artists knew that what made Under Pressure special was its singularity. It was lightning in a bottle precisely because the bottle was sealed immediately after the strike. Trying to recreate that magic deliberately would inevitably result in something lesser, something forced. The idea died as quickly as it was born, but the fact that it existed at all reveals something important about those Montreux sessions. Despite the ego battles and the near violence and the creative standoffs, there was genuine artistic respect between Bowie and Mercury. They recognized in each other not just talent, but a similar drive to push boundaries, to never settle for comfortable or safe artistic choices. In another universe, perhaps that Bowie-Mercury album exists. In this one, we have Under Pressure, and sometimes the perfect collaboration is the one that knows when to end. The baseline controversy. Years after the song's release, an unexpected controversy emerged that added another layer to the Under Pressure mythology. When Vanilla Ice sampled the iconic bass line for his 1990 hit, Ice Ice Baby, he initially claimed the lines were different, that his version had an additional note that made it legally distinct. The claim was immediately ridiculed by anyone with functioning ears, and Vanilla Ice eventually admitted he'd sampled the riff without permission, leading to an out-of-court settlement. But the controversy reignited a long, simmering question about the bass line's true origin. John Deacon had always been credited as the creator of that four-note riff, but Freddie Mercury once mentioned in an interview that the bass line emerged from a group jam, making its authorship collective rather than individual. Bowie, characteristically, stayed out of the debate entirely, though friends reported he found the whole Vanilla Ice situation amusing rather than offensive. The bass line controversy, trivial as it might seem, actually touches on something important about the creative process behind Under Pressure. Unlike most Queen songs, which typically had clear individual authorship, this track was genuinely collaborative in the messiest, most organic sense. Ideas emerged from arguments, melodies appeared in the midst of conflicts, and the final product was shaped by everyone present in ways that made individual credit almost impossible to assign. This collective authorship, born from necessity and chaos rather than intentional collaboration, is part of what gives Under Pressure its unique energy. You can hear the different voices competing and complementing each other in every section. Bowie's minimalism fighting with Queen's maximalism, Freddie's emotion pushing against David's intellectualism, the whole track existing in a state of productive tension that never quite resolves. It's a song about pressure that was created under pressure, and that authenticity is impossible to fake. 40 years of resonance. As Under Pressure approaches its 45th anniversary, its cultural impact continues to expand rather than fade. New generations discover the song through movie soundtracks, television shows, and the endless recommendation algorithms of streaming services. Each generation finds something different in the lyrics, projecting their own era's anxieties onto Bowie and Freddie's words about buildings burning and people on streets. For Gen X, who were teenagers when the song was released, Under Pressure remains forever associated with Cold War fears and the genuine belief that nuclear annihilation might arrive at any moment. For millennials, the song became an anthem during the post-9/11 years, when different pressures and different fears dominated global consciousness. Gen Z, discovering the track in the age of social media and climate anxiety, hears in it a message about the crushing weight of modern existence, the pressure to perform perfection while privately crumbling. The song's ability to remain relevant across such different contexts speaks to something essential about great art. It's specific enough to feel authentic, but universal enough to transcend its moment of creation. Bowie and Freddie, fighting in that Montreux studio over every word and note, somehow captured something timeless about human vulnerability and resilience. Musicians continue to cite Under Pressure as an influence and inspiration. The song appears on countless greatest collaborations lists, typically near the top. Music theory professors use it as an example of how tension and resolution work not just musically, but in the collaborative process itself. And that bass line, John Deacon's simple four-note pattern, remains one of the most recognizable riffs in popular music history. The final reunion that never happened, in the years before Freddie Mercury's death, there were occasional rumors of a Bowie Queen reunion for a one-off performance, perhaps at a major benefit concert or award show. The rumors were always denied by both camps, and for good reason. Neither artist had any interest in recreating something that had worked precisely because it was unrepeatable. But according to Brian May, there was one moment when it almost happened. In early 1991, as Freddie's health was deteriorating rapidly from AIDS complications, he expressed a wish to perform Under Pressure one final time with Bowie. The request was relayed through managers and mutual friends, and for a brief moment, it seemed possible. Bowie, who'd maintained respectful distance from Freddie for years, was apparently willing to make an exception given the circumstances. Logistics were discussed. Mountain Studios in Montreux, where the song had been born, was suggested as the location. It would be private, intimate, just the original collaborators and a small film crew to document the moment. But Freddie's health declined too quickly. The performance never happened, and on November 24, 1991, Freddie Mercury died, taking with him the possibility of that final reunion. David Bowie's response to Freddie's death was characteristically private. He didn't make grand public statements or perform emotional tributes. Instead, at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert held at Wembley Stadium on April 20, 1992, Bowie appeared and performed both Under Pressure with Queen and The Lord's Prayer, his voice cracking with genuine emotion in a way that his usually controlled performances never revealed. Watching footage of that performance, you can see something in Bowie's face that's rarely visible in his public appearances. Unguarded grief, the loss of someone who'd pushed him to be better, even as they'd driven each other crazy. The collaboration had lasted only 24 hours, but its impact on both artists had been profound and lasting. Conclusion: the alchemy of conflict. The story of Under Pressure is ultimately about the strange alchemy of creative conflict. In an industry that often celebrates smooth collaborations and easy partnerships, this song stands as a monument to the productive power of friction, disagreement, and clashing egos. Bowie and Mercury created something immortal, not despite their conflicts, but because of them, each artist pushing the other beyond comfortable boundaries into territory neither would have explored alone. The lessons of those Montreux sessions extend beyond music. In any creative field, the most memorable work often emerges from the most difficult collaborations, where different visions collide with enough force to create something neither party could have imagined independently. Comfort produces competence. Pressure produces diamonds. Looking back 40-plus years later, with both artists now gone and the song having outlived them both, Under Pressure exists as evidence that great art can emerge from chaos, that sometimes the best collaborations are the ones that feel like they're falling apart at every moment, held together only by the shared commitment to creating something worthy of the struggle. That 24 hours in Montreux, Switzerland, produced 3.5 minutes of music that continues to resonate across generations. The arguments, the ego battles, the near-physical confrontations, all of it was necessary. All of it fed into the creative pressure cooker that forged something timeless. David Bowie and Freddie Mercury fought like warriors, created like gods, and left behind a legacy that proves the best art often requires artists to push each other to, and sometimes past, their breaking points. The pressure of those sessions became the pressure in the song, and the song became a testament to what happens when two unstoppable creative forces collide. The explosion was beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely unrepeatable. And that's exactly what makes it perfect.